Okay, looks like we are right at 2 p.m. So we will go ahead and get started. And I'll do the housekeeping things as people continue to trickle in. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello, and welcome to the self care webinar series entitled You Got This Because You Do. I am Erica Blackwood, the safety specialist here at NC CASA, and myself, along with Alexandra Smith, our NC CASA training specialist, will be here today to facilitate the first webinar in this series entitled The Four Agreements for Advocates. A few housekeeping items before I turn it over to our wonderful presenter, Linda Douglas from the New Hampshire Coalition. Today's format is webinar, so we will share Linda's screen shortly, so you do not have to worry about turning your camera on or anything like that. I welcome you to interact throughout the chat. You can send a message to all panelists and attendees, or if you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A feature. This is our space. Over the next few months, this is the space where you should do all you can to take care of yourselves, including taking breaks and stepping away from the computer as needed. If you have some snacks, feel free to snack away. Your well-being is paramount as we move through this series. So do what your body tells you is right. Certificates will be available, and throughout today's webinar, Alexandra will put into the chat how to get your certificate. Feel free to attend as many or as few of these sessions as you like, but only those who have completed the entire series will receive a certificate stating such. If you choose to move through the entire series, you will receive a certificate for completion of the series at the end of them all. Participation is not necessary, but strongly encouraged. We want to make sure you're taking advantage of the time you have with the knowledgeable presenters who will be in the space from all across the country. So make sure you are as engaged as your mental space will provide. Some presentations will use webinar format, as the webinar today, and some presentations will be in meeting format to get a maximum engagement level. So please ask all the questions, blow up the chat, and also feel free to use your voice by unmuting yourself and engaging in the conversation. So now, with that being said, let's get started. I will now turn it over to Linda. Linda, if you would like, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome from New Hampshire, where it's 32 degrees. I just checked the temperature down in North Carolina, and I see it's like 53 degrees, which would mean we would all be out in shorts, and well, actually a lot of people in shorts and t-shirts wandering around New Hampshire all winter long. But we have snow. Actually, yesterday afternoon for my self-care, I took off a couple of hours early and went snowshoeing. So that's and one of my colleagues is actually going cross-country skiing this afternoon. So that's what we do up here for self-care. I don't know. I know I used to live in Norfolk, Virginia, so I know what winter can be like down in that part. You never know from one day to the next really what you're going to be getting. You would be getting rain and cold, and then you could be getting sunshine and 70 degrees. So I love the introduction, Erica. I really do prefer if everybody, it's hard for me because once I start sharing my screen, I can't see the chat. I don't mind being interrupted. So if anything comes up in the Q&A, somebody interrupt me and we can go to it. Or just if you want to speak out, go ahead and unmute yourself and go, hey, Linda, I've got a question or a comment. I love that interaction. I've been the Trauma-Informed Services Specialist here at the New Hampshire Coalition since 2009. I'm coming up on 12 years. And I've worked in the field of domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health, sexual assault since 1994. So I've been around quite a while. I guess I'm considered one of the old ladies of the movement, but I I enjoy it. I enjoy working with a variety of people. And I'm getting to the point where I'm really excited because there are so many wonderful young people who are coming into the field that I am ready to hand the reins over to them very, very soon. I'm just like, have at it. You've got everything that you need to be able to do this, because this world is so different from when I first started back in the mid 90s, that it really is about other people taking it on. And in order to do that, people have to be taking care of themselves. And because without that, you run out of gas pretty quick. So I'm really loving that you have this series on self-care, and that, you know, you can do it because it's so important to be done. There's been some research out there that says that people who have fewer years doing this type of work are more likely to end up with vicarious trauma. Those of us who've been doing the work longer have less of it, because we've learned how important it is to take care of ourselves. It really is an ethical piece of the work that we do. It's, to me, what I like to tell advocates is it's as important as making sure that you have gas in your car so you can get to work, that you have the right clothes to wear if you're going to court, that you have all of those resources that you want to be able to hand over to victim survivors. It's that important that you maintain that self-care so that you can be there for the people that you want to be there for. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my presentation. My mouse and I have not been getting along real well today, so sometimes all of my slides go buzzing all over the place. So I'll just try and get everything to work on this. So objectives, I'm not worried about them. Some of you may know this guy, and I'm a big fan of the Avengers and superheroes. And a few years ago, I started to incorporate them into some of my trainings, particularly when I'm talking to at-risk high school students who fall in various ranges, from people living with learning disabilities to people with behavioral issues to sometimes people with developmental disabilities. And one thing that I find is they all respond to superheroes. And if you are familiar with Thor's story, Thor did not take good care of himself. And he had taken on this belief that he was responsible for the fate of the earth. And when he was unable, right now I'm blanking on the name of the guy who was destroying everybody and basically, you know, got rid of half the Earth's population. But Thor had thought that that was his responsibility. And when he went through that and he failed, he had some trauma from that. And he had some vicarious trauma from seeing a number of his friends die. And so he stopped doing what he was doing. He no longer found any purpose in his life. And he went and handed over the reins of responsibility to Valkyrie. And he sat around drinking Coors beer and eating chips and guacamole, and turned into what we now know is what Iron Man referred to as Lebowski Thor. And we really do need to be able to take care of ourselves, because then when he was called back into action, he wasn't quite in the shape that he was prior. And we want to be able to be there when we're called to be. So a few years ago, actually it's been quite a while now, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we have a group here. We have AmeriCorps Victim Assistance Programs, an AmeriCorps group that comes in specifically and works with our DVSA programs. And there was this one young woman who was working for a program, and she had a survivor with whom she was working who had a lot of trauma, had some substance use going on, And this young advocate was taking things personally. She would be calling me up and she'd say, I don't know what to do. She doesn't seem to like me. Some weeks she likes me and some weeks she don't. And I found myself continuously saying to her, you can't take this personally. It has to do with her trauma. You're making it personal, and it really isn't. It has very little to do with it. And the more that I got into this conversation, the more I realized that I needed to pull this book off the shelf and start talking about it to more of the advocates here in New Hampshire. Because it really, I ended up putting it together as the 4 agreements for advocates. And I'm going to go into some of the differences in a minute. So just a quick overview, and then I'll break it down a little bit more. The first one is be impeccable with your word. Here he says, speak with integrity, say only what you mean, avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip. I'll talk more about that. And use—
Hey, Linda.
Yes.
Could you put your presentation in slideshow mode, because we can only see like the PowerPoint, the whole thing.
What do you mean?
So can you put it in slideshow, like start it from the slide that you're on? Because we only see like the entire presentation. We see it in PowerPoint mode.
How's that?
Better, yes.
Okay. So, so using the word of power of your word in the direction of truth and love. Don't take anything personally. What others do is nothing others do is because of you. What others say or do is a projection of their own reality. I'm going to have a yes and to this when I get to this part. Don't make assumptions. Be able to ask questions and find out what's really going on with someone and to express what you really want. Communicate as clearly as you can. You can completely transform your life if you don't make assumptions. And then the last one is always do your best. And so I'm going to break these down a little bit more as I struggle with my mouse. So be impeccable with your word. Miguel Ruiz defines this word impeccably as meaning without sin. And sin is anything that you do which goes against yourself. So you go against yourself when you judge or blame yourself for anything. When you're impeccable, you take responsibility for your actions, but you do not judge or blame yourself. Okay, so you want to be able to look at what you say and take responsibility for it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and not taking things personally, but we really want to be careful what it is that we say about ourselves. But we also want to be sure that we're not saying things and using our words against others. So criticizing, blaming, or gossiping about the people with whom we work, either other advocates or survivors, is not honoring the agreement to be impeccable. One of the ways that I saw this happening at one time was I was attending some staff meetings to do some debriefing with them in regards to some of I hate the word case, but regarding some of the situations that some of the survivors were going through. And this was early on, and I've seen very little of it in maybe the past 5 or 6 years, but people were using words to talk about survivors as, oh, they're crazy, they have, and one of my least favorite words in the whole wide world is borderline. So it was like, oh, they're just borderline. And I would just sit back and I'd say, we should not be using those words. First of all, because it will influence how we are with that person when we're with them one-to-one. And it also influences how other people are going to see that person about whom you're talking when they meet that person. that's all going to be there in their head, instead of looking at things as this person has some survival skills that are somewhat difficult, but that's their strength right now. That's what they're using. They are trying to get their needs met. So we really don't want to be criticizing and gossiping about people, because particularly if it's people that we work with too, that's not good self-care. We want to be able to take care of each other and be responsive to each other and be responsible for our actions. So we really want to be impeccable with our word. I also saw this once when I was talking to one of my granddaughters. She works in early child care. And I asked her a few years ago, I was really impressed with how she never used any four-letter word. I mean, we're talking not even damn or darn or whatever. And at that time, she was still, I think she was between undergrad and graduate school. And she explained to me that she had to be very careful what she said, because if she didn't watch her language when she wasn't around the children with whom she worked, and she works with preschoolers, she said she would be more likely to slip when she was around the children. So she made it a point to be impeccable with her word all the time, instead of worrying about it just when she was around the children. And I think that's really wonderful, because if we're impeccable with our word, people are going to understand that, and we're not going to get blasted by surprises if somebody tells somebody else what we've been saying. That there's going to be a greater comfort and feeling of safety with your coworkers if this is an agreement that you're keeping to. And then there's that we should not make promises we can't keep. It's better to say no than to make a promise that we'll eventually have to break. I think some of us have had that experience probably early on, and we learned from it, where we made a promise to a survivor and then had to come back and tell them that we weren't able to do what we had promised to do. And then we also learn things like not to make promises for the systems within which we work. Like the police are going to do a good job. One of the things I hate hearing when I'm watching a police show is when somebody says, we're going to catch the guy. I'm like, don't make promises you can't keep, because there's too many components to that. One of the things that I've noticed with advocates over the years is that a lot of our own vicarious trauma from the work that we do doesn't necessarily come from the stories that we hear from survivors. However, it comes from the system failures, when the criminal justice system or housing or children and families or all of those other systems within which we're working, when those fail the people that we're working with. We call that institutional trauma, where that trauma continues to be perpetuated on somebody by the systems that are supposed to be helping them. And so we want to be very careful that we keep our expectations. We don't make promises to ourselves and others about what it is that we're hoping that these systems are going to do. So now I want to show you a great little film, because a part of being impeccable with our word is being able to be able to be empathetic in different ways. So let me see if I can get this up. The unshare and share piece always gets, see if we can do this. Can you see this?
As you want.
Just stop a minute. Can somebody just tell me if they can see
Yes.
it?
Okay. Yes, we can see it and we can hear it.
Yay, thank you.
Never need to pick up a camera or use any fancy editing software.
Yeah,
With Doodly, you drag, you drop, you tweak some settings.
empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. It's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, why is this not working?
Okay, as we wait for Linda to get back connected, I think that I fixed it so that everyone can unmute themselves if they have questions or want to engage in conversation. You all should have the ability to unmute yourselves now.
I'm back.
Yay!
I don't know what happened, if it was your end or my end. I haven't had that happen before. It's telling me I can't start my video because you stopped it. Can you start my video again?
Can you check that, Alexandra?
There we go.
Co-host, so you should be good. Perfect.
I'm good. Okay.
Got it.
Did you get to see the whole Brene Brown video?
Did everyone get to see the video?
I won't play it again, but I just hope it. Okay.
Yes. Okay. I got to see it too. Yes. Everyone looks like everyone has gotten a chance to see that.
Great. It's just all of a sudden everything got locked up on me, so I'm not quite sure what happened. So I want to move, before I go into don't take anything personally, I just want to stop a second. And does anyone have anything to say or add on being impeccable with your word? Just open it up for a little discussion. Have you found it's helpful to be impeccable, to be not make mock promises? Have you been in situations where you've had somebody get upset with you because you made a promise that you weren't able to keep? I guess no one has anything to say. Okay, I'll continue. Yes.
We have a comment. We have a couple comments. Danielle says, we train our volunteers never to make promises. And Karen also says, I have learned not to make promises.
So Karen, are you willing to talk about what it was that taught you not to make promises? I think it's so hard because we want to help people feel better in the moment. And
Right.
it's a natural thing to want to be able to do that. But you're right, we can't predict the future. And when we make those promises, just because we want people to feel better, then we're trying to help ourselves rather than helping the person that we're with. All right, I'm going to move on to don't take anything personally. So it was Don Miguel Ruiz puts it very succinctly, nothing other people do is because of you, it's because of them. And I take this from a trauma-informed standpoint, is that we know that sometimes we are going to do things that activate someone's trauma, that they're in a position where we could just, it could be a word that we use, a phrase that we say, it could be just a look on our face could cause someone to react to us in anger, or they could shut down, or or if we're very open, they could be open with us. But they do this primarily because they've learned in the past that those words are safe or unsafe. And so we want to be really aware of that, and instead of taking all of this personally. A few years ago, back in the early, the mid 2000s, I was working with a case manager at a mental health center. He was one of the people that was on her caseload was a man who was experiencing increased symptoms due to being diagnosed with schizophrenia. And when his symptoms would increase, he would become very, very angry. And one day he really sort of word vomited all over this case manager. And she came to me and she said, I'm not going to talk to him. I'm not going to work with him again until he apologizes to me. And and she never liked me after this because I said, his anger has nothing to do with you. You need to accept that that had to do with what was going on with him. And by you insisting that you need to have an apology from this person, you're making it about you when it really is not all about you. Now, she ended up taking what I said personally instead of being able to be responsible for what we do with our language. So we want to be responsible for any harm that we may do to others with our language. That's the and piece I've been talking about earlier. In fact, I'm going to just double check here. Yep. I want to just show you a clip of a video that some of you may have already seen, but I like to do this because when we're talking to people in groups and situations, when we're talking to them, particularly about issues having to do with race, and I often say to folks, you know, it's up to the person to whom we made the statement to decide whether or not that's a racist comment, or whether or not what you did was racist and how it impacted them, because we don't want to say, oh, I didn't really mean that. Well, I've got this short talk here.
What you said on the internet.
By Jay Smooth, and I'm just starting it right here.
Video and took in that feedback. I've been thinking about what other approaches we might be able to take. And I think since we can never entirely fix that conversation by changing how we voice the critique, I think we might be able to also make it budge a little bit by considering how we receive that critique and how we might be able to take a suggestion that we may have said or done something racist and take it in stride and not completely freak out and assume that the world thinks that I'm a bad person. So the first thing that makes it difficult to accept that critique that you may have said something racist is simply that it involves the possibility that you made a mistake. And none of us takes that too well. None of us enjoys that. But in most other situations, when the possibility arises that we made a mistake, we are usually able to take a few deep breaths and tell ourselves, I'm only human. Everyone makes mistakes. But when it comes to conversations involving race and prejudice, for some reason, we tend to make the opposite assumption. We deal with race and prejudice with this all or nothing, good person, bad person binary, in which either you are racist or you are not racist. And if you're not batting 1,000, then you're striking out every time. And this puts us in a situation where we're striving to meet an impossible standard. And if anything less than perfection means that you are a racist, that means any suggestion that you've made a mistake, any suggestion that you've been less than perfect is a suggestion that you're a bad person. So we become averse to any suggestion that we should consider our thoughts and actions. And it makes it harder for us to work on our imperfections. When you believe that you must be perfect in order to be good, it makes you averse to recognizing your own inevitable imperfections, and that lets them stagnate and grow. So the belief that you must be perfect in order to be good is an obstacle to being as good as you can be. So it would make our conversations with each other a lot smoother, and it would make us better at being good if we could recognize that we're not perfect and embrace that. So I want to offer a couple of things that you could keep in mind when you need to remind yourself that I'm not supposed to be perfect when it comes to navigating race. And the first thing is that anytime we're dealing with race issues, we are dealing with a social construct that was not born out of any science or reason or logic. We are grappling with a social construct that was not designed to make sense. And to the extent that it is the product of design, the race constructs that we live in America were shaped specifically by a desire to avoid making sense. They were shaped for centuries by a need to rationalize and justify indefensible acts. So when we grapple with race issues, we're grappling with something that was designed for centuries to make us circumvent our best instincts. It's a dance partner that's designed to trip us up. So just based on that alone, we should be able to keep in mind that you will never bat 1,000 when it comes to dealing with race issues. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is, as we are all imperfect humans, and as has been laid out in some of the other talks this evening, we all have unconscious thought processes and psychosocial mechanisms that prop up. There are many things in our day-to-day lives that lead us towards developing little pockets of prejudice, that lead us towards acting unkind to others without having any intent to do so. These are things that will just naturally develop in our day-to-day lives. So the problem with that all or nothing binary is it causes us to look at racism and prejudice as if they are akin to having tonsils. You either have tonsils or you don't. And if you've had your prejudice removed, you never need to consider if someone says, I think you may have a little unconscious prejudice, you say, well, no, my prejudice was removed in 2005. I went to see that movie Crash. It's all good. But that's not how these things work. When you go through your day-to-day lives, there are all of these mass media and social stimuli, as well as processes that we all have inside our brains that we're not aware of, that cause us to build up little pockets of prejudice every day, just like plaque develops on our teeth. So we need to move away from the tonsils paradigm of race discourse towards the dental hygiene paradigm of race discourse. Just basically, if I could offer one piece of advice. And in general, I think we need to move away from the premise that being a good person is a fixed, immutable characteristic, and shift towards seeing being good as a practice. And it is a practice that we carry out by engaging with our imperfections. So we need to shift towards thinking of being a good person the same way we think of being a clean person. Being a clean person is something that you maintain and work on every day. We don't assume that I'm a clean person, therefore I don't need to brush my teeth. And when someone suggests to us that we've got something stuck in our teeth, we don't say, well, what do you mean? I have something stuck in my teeth, I'm a clean person. Why would you? So I know that this is no small task, but if we can shift a little bit closer towards viewing those race conversations the same way we view a conversation about something stuck in our teeth, it will go a long way towards making our conversations a bit smoother and allow us to work together on bigger issues around race, because there are a lot of, beyond the persistent conversational awkwardness of race, there are persistent systemic and institutional issues around race.
So the important point, because that I want to make is because even though this says don't take anything personally, that doesn't mean that we don't have to personally reflect on our actions and and make excuses for what we may have had pointed out to us. So it's about not saying that, as Jay says, it's not that we're being called a horrible person, but we're saying there's this one aspect of you that really needs to be taken care of. And so it's about combining the being impeccable with your word, with not taking anything personally, and putting a self-reflective piece to that. Because not taking anything personally without self-reflection turns us into people who are callous and don't care about what other people think of us. So we have to really be able to reflect on, maybe I did do something that activated that person's trauma, and I need to be careful that I don't do that again. I need to be aware of what it is and what it is about me, knowing who I am, but also, like he says, we all carry those little pockets of our own past trauma, our own biases, our own prejudice, and our own internal racism that sometimes comes out, and we have to be able to take responsibility for that. So I never want anybody to say that I don't have to take anything personally, therefore I don't have to be responsible for that, because it's all on you and it's because of you. Okay, we still want to be responsible for any harm we may do others with our language. And so we can't even take the good stuff personally. That's another hard part about don't taking anything personally, because even when we have that victim survivor that says, you are the best advocate I've ever worked with, you're the only one I want to work with, you know, I just really appreciate everything you've done for me. For every person that says that to you, you're going to have somebody who's going to tell you that you are no help at all, and they don't understand why they can't work with somebody else today. It's about just knowing that sometimes we may seek out and work with the people that make us feel good about ourselves. And again, it's not about us. We want to be able to do the work with anybody, and we want to make sure that we're doing the same level of support for everyone, whether they have, whether they're angry at us or whether they're telling us that we're the greatest person in the whole wide world. So it's about understanding that taking care of that will also ease some of the burden on our coworkers too. Because when we're taking care of ourselves by not taking it personally, but still having that self-reflection, we're not going to be spending a whole lot of time with our coworkers complaining about somebody who's doing something that we've taken personally. We're going to be able to just do that self-reflection and say, I will do better next time, but I can understand what's going on with that.
Linda, we have a question in the chat. It says, are there any exercises we can do to help us with this?
It just is a matter to me of being able to sit back, and when you feel that reaction, because I think we all have, I'm going to turn off the share. So there we go. We all have internal reactions. I know for me, I've learned that when something is said to me that I see as a threat or something that's attacking me, I get this, I call it a zing that goes from my stomach up to my brain. I can just feel it, and I start to get really tense. And when I recognize that, that's when I have to sit back and do, is this really happening? What can I do to take care of myself right now? It may be any of the other self-care things that you do, like getting up and going for a walk, going in the bathroom and throwing water on my face, just taking that moment to have something hot or cold in my hands so that I can come back to the present moment. Because sometimes when we're taking something personally, it has to do with our past trauma. I'll give you an example. I'm 64 years old. I have been doing this work for 27 years, but I have a trauma history, like many of us do. And one of the things that trips my activation button around my past trauma is when a supervisor or even someone that I work with says to me, I'd like us to have, can we talk? Can we talk later? Or do you have time to talk later? So what I've done, because that usually sends me into a panic. In fact, if somebody says to me at 9 o'clock in the morning, I need you to make time in your calendar so we can talk later this morning. Usually what will happen is I will go into such a panic that I will start thinking about packing up my office and looking for another job or applying for unemployment, because I'm certain that during that conversation that's going to happen later on in the day, I'm going to get fired. Okay. I have never been fired from a position, but I'm always convinced that I'm in trouble when I hear those words, we need to talk. All has to do with my past trauma. Okay. So fortunately, I've had supervisors that I've been able to talk to about this. And all I ask is that they say, Linda, can we talk later? You're not in trouble. That's all I need to hear. I can sit back and relax. And then I'm not in a state of anxiety when we do get to that point of talking. So I've been very fortunate in having supervisors that are willing to do that. But part of it came from me having that self-reflection. Oh, Melvina, yes. Those of us who have had the trauma history, we constantly think that we're in trouble. For, there are even days when I will wake up thinking, I'm certain I'm in trouble for something, I just don't know what it is. But that all comes out of our past trauma. And so if we can recognize how we feel that in our body, we can catch it in the early stages and take care of it and do what we need to do. And sometimes that is just saying to the person, I'm a little anxious, or just saying, can you give me an idea of what it is we're going to be talking about later so I can prepare? Simple as that. Or if you feel like you need to go to the extreme that I did of actually saying to my supervisor, just tell me, I'm not in trouble, is probably a good place. That was a good place for me to go. And I felt comfortable doing that. In fact, I had a supervisor that I had for many years who left last summer, who actually told the person who came on and took her job after her that this was something that was really helpful in working with me, was just letting me know I'm not in trouble. And it was great that she did that. See, yeah. And knowing that you're not the only one that feels this way is also helpful too, so that you can do that check-in with each other. I don't know if Erica and Melvina, if you're coworkers, but if you have a coworker that that feels the same way, sometimes they can help you. Just being able to take that deep breath, that this is not about what's happening today. This has more to do with your own past trauma. Okay. I know it is physically and emotionally exhausting. I honestly would have to say, I think talking to a therapist about this is important because, and also that if you have had conversations with survivors on how to manage their trauma responses, those are the same things that you do for yourself. Taking that breath, thinking it through, and sometimes just the awareness that this is not about what's happening today, but has more to do with the past, helps calm down that response. As trauma survivors, we're constantly looking out for danger, and it's about doing those things that help us feel safe. So when people ask me for tips on how to handle this, I often want to say, what conversation would you have with a survivor around this who's not feeling safe? How would you help them feel safe? And those are the things that you do for you. We're advocates. That's what we do. We just forget to do those things for ourselves. And that's what self-care is about. I remember I did some vicarious trauma presentations and talked about self-care. And I had an advocate who complained and said, but you don't tell us how to take care of it. And I'm like, oh, that's because, and then I asked her, I says, what kinds of things do you say to people on the phone or when you're in person or you're preparing them to give testimony or anything like that on how to stay present in their body and how to manage the emotions they're feeling? So she listed off a few really great things. And I said, and those are the things that we need to do for our trauma. So it's all around that. So this one definitely is related to trauma. And then I tell people, you don't take any excuse me crap, okay? Just because you're not going to take anything personally still doesn't mean that people should be given the latitude to try and push through boundaries and personally attack you. I often say to volunteer advocates, people are going to get angry with you over the phone. They're going to yell about the services that they've received. They're going to yell about the perpetrators in their life. They are going to carry a lot of stuff. But when they start attacking you personally, calling you names, making threats to you, you don't have to put up with that. That's where you can take that step back and say, okay, I think we really need to take a break right now. If you're safe, I'm just going to go ahead and say, let's go ahead and end this call and we can go ahead and we can talk again later. but right now is not a good time for us to continue this conversation. Or talk to your supervisor about how to end these kinds of calls, because you really don't need to be taking that, because that's another thing that impacts our self-care and our vicarious trauma, is constantly getting those types of messages. And yes, we know it's due to their trauma, and it's really not about us personally, but it can activate our own trauma if we have been in situations before where an intimate partner or another person in our lives was attacking us in those ways. So we don't have to take that anymore. Sometimes I think we have a tendency to believe that, well, I've got healthy boundaries and I'm not going to bother me. But it really can wear on us. So be real careful. So the third one, Ruiz says, don't make assumptions. The way to keep yourself from making assumptions is to ask questions. Make sure communication is clear. If you don't understand, ask. Have the courage to ask questions till you are as clear as you can be. Like this. Before you assume, try this crazy method called asking. I primarily up here in the Northeast, Yankees. A lot of people like to judge other people based on their white middle class perception of how things should be. And I often say, just because that is your lens, that is what you believe, does not necessarily mean that that should pertain to everybody. That not everyone is going to clean the house the same. Not everyone is going to parent the same. Not everybody is going to have certain practices that are the same as yours. And if there's something that comes up, have the cultural humility to be able to step back and say, can you tell me more about that? I'm really interested in learning what it is that brought you to doing something that way. And doing it in a really non-judgmental manner, so that you're not saying, I don't understand that you need to explain it to me because it just doesn't make sense. It's more of, I really want to understand. And I know before I started doing this work, I had a good friend who had grown up in both England and Germany. She was bilingual. Actually, I think she's trilingual. I was watching her one day, excellent housekeeper, an artist, excellent mother, but I was watching her do dishes one day, and she was taking the dishes out of the hot soapy water, putting them directly into the drainer. And I looked at her and I said, you don't rinse your dishes? Very judgmental. And she looked at me and she goes, no, the water is hot enough that the suds immediately slide off. I don't need to rinse them. And I'm like, okay. Now my sister is married to a man who came to this country from China. And his sister and mother also came here. And they're all well educated. And my sister was at her sister-in-law's house one day and watching her sister-in-law and mother-in-law do dishes. And they didn't use any detergent at all. They just used hot water. And my sister, being curious, said, you don't use detergent? And they said, no, we don't like to have those chemicals on our dishes. So some of us may do dishes where we just worry about the dishwasher. Some of us may wash the dishes and put them in the drainer to dry, whether or not we use suds or not. Some of us may dry the dishes and put them away. None of those are wrong. But what I see with a lot of people is we feel like sometimes we have to educate people to do the right thing. But if we have the, like I said, the humility to ask, what that does is that keeps that relationship open. And we want to keep that relationship open, because if we are judging other people do things, they're going to shut down on us. And then we're going to feel like we're not doing a good job, or we're going to start thinking badly about the person that we're trying to support. So really have some humility in that area. There is one assumption that you can make, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. The fourth agreement is always do your best. Doing our best is what maintains our commitment to the first three agreements and keeps us focused. Always do your best, no more and no less. But remember, your best is never going to be the same from one moment to the next. Everything changes all the time. So your best will sometimes be high quality and other times it will not be as good. So my best today is maybe not as good as it is first thing in the morning because I'm better and can think clearer in the morning, and I know that. But you're getting a better best from me today because I took that time off yesterday to go out and do some snowshoeing and get out of this apartment that I've been working out of for the past 10 months. So doing that, I was able to take care of me and raise my level of best for today. I also know that by taking care of ourselves, it's like setting up our immunity so that when we have a day where something hits, we've got the ability to have a better best than we would have if we hadn't taken care of ourselves, okay? So it's just always important that no matter what it is that you're doing at the moment, and you can honestly self-reflect, yet this is the best that I can do today. And then remember, it relies on our self-care. And and remember that everyone else is doing their best. And when they can, they will do better. That was something I heard from another advocate years ago who just said to me, you know, that person is really doing the best they can today. And when they can, they're going to do better. And that's really the best expectation we can have of each other, is that no matter what, we're always doing our best. It's when I have worked with both domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. And sometimes when I'm working with domestic violence survivors, they're blaming themselves, particularly after I talk to them about trauma in children. They may start to blame themselves for things that did or didn't do when their children were younger. And they'll go down that whole path of, well, I should have left, or I should have realized. And I said, you can't judge yourself for what you did then based on what you know now. You didn't have the same information then. So that she was doing her best 15, 20 years from now, but now because of where she is and the new information that she has, the rest is better. So once we stop and take a breath and focus back on where we may not be keeping the agreements, we can then move forward with integrity and focus on victim-centered services. It really, I honestly do believe when we take a look at these 4 agreements that we're able to, okay, don't gossip, don't use words that are demeaning about people. Now, I'm not going to take that personally, but I am going to self-reflect on whether or not there's something I could word differently or change. I'm going to make an assumption. I'm just going to ask. I'm going to find out what it is that about that person's life that maybe it can explain why they do those things, and do it in a non-judgmental way. And breathe. And I'm just going to remind myself that today, given everything that's going on, all the things that I'm feeling, that today I'm doing my best. So I just want to open it up to comments, feedback, anything else that people would like to add. Let's talk. Did I see some faces? I would really love to see some faces if that's possible. It's one thing I said, and that's me using my self-care, is sometimes I just ask people to turn on their camera, because like I said, I live alone with my cat, and I like to see people's faces when I'm talking to them, because that helps me feel less isolated from the world in the work that I'm doing. So, hi.
Yeah, where is the cat?
Well, she's actually behind me on a blanket, but you can't see her because she blends into the blanket. Have you seen the cat in other?
Yes. So Linda has the cutest coworker, and sometimes she will be all across Linda's chair and
Yeah.
just showing off. So I love to see your cat in spaces when we have our RSP meetings. Like,
And she usually does that more the beginning of the week than she does the end of the week.
oh, so she has a schedule. Oh, okay. She's got a schedule of work.
Yeah, she does. And today she's doing, oh, we've got a raised hand. I saw it. Where did it go? If you want to speak, just go ahead and unmute and say something. Jessica Johnson, where are you?
I don't have anything to say. I'm sorry. It just did it bad. So
I know it does that now and then. All right. Is there anything else you need from me then?
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
I really appreciate everything that you have shared with us today, because I have found myself in a lot of those same situations that you explained about the promises, about thinking that it's my fault or what did I do wrong. Everything that you said today made sense to me, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
I'm so glad that it was helpful for you. I hope that it reduces your stress and your vicarious trauma, and just, that you see it as a form of self-care.
And I don't seem to have that happen when I'm dealing with a survivor, but it happens to me personally.
Yeah.
When the comment earlier, I had promised something to somebody, and circumstances did not allow me, did not allow me to follow through with that promise, and it caused a lot of hurt to the person. Yeah. And I still feel like I have to make it up to them some way, and I think I just have to kind of let it go. Am I correct?
And yes, and it created a lot of extra stress for you. And I know that one thing that I didn't talk about is the ability to say no. Sometimes we'll make that promise when we should have said no. And one of the best things I heard from somebody once is that no is a complete sentence. That's okay. And I know that for some people that they have a hard time not volunteering for things, that it's like whenever somebody says, we need somebody to do such and such, it's like your hand pops up. And I think some of us doing this work, we have this internal belief that if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. If I don't do it, it's not going to get done the right way. But I've started, one of my self-cares has been, if it comes out as an email, I'm going to give it a minute before I respond saying that I can do it, because somebody else may pop up and say that they want to do it. And I'm like, yay, I didn't jump in when somebody else wanted that opportunity. Or I say, a big one is taking notes at staff meetings. I've said, I'm not going to say yes if you ask me at the last minute, but I will take notes at the February 8th meeting. Okay. I take notes, I put me down for such and such, because the last minute thing, I like to know that I'm going to be doing something. So that's just me, but it's training yourself to not volunteer for something immediately because, and to put it this way, is you may be robbing someone else of the joy of doing that thing that you did and said yes to right away. Okay. It was how I learned to accept gifts without going, oh, you should have. Was somebody very lovely one day had given me something really wonderful. And I said, oh, you shouldn't have. I wish you hadn't done that. They looked at me and they said, how do you feel when you give things to other people? And I said, I feel really good. And she said, and why would you rob me of that feeling?
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to accept what's given to you, recognizing that you are giving a gift in return to someone. And it's sometimes to me, it's the same thing. When we're jumping up to say, I'll do it, I'll do it. You know, we're taking all this extra burden on ourselves, and other people may want those opportunities. Okay.
Yeah, someone.
Thank you. Thank you so
I don't-
much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome, Karen.
Someone had a really good comment in the chat. They said that Zoom isn't easy on their phone, but they've loved the information. And their director always reminds them that you are not responsible for the outcome, just your effort.
Yes.
And this helps me get through those very tough situations.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Sometimes we may not feel successful in what we've done, but when we work with somebody and they know that you're there for them in the future, that is success. They may not have been able to take all the steps at this time that you would say for them to get to safety, but they know who you are and they know what you do, and they will come back at another time. So we have to, I think that was one of my biggest self-care pieces over the years, was learning that success is not everything turning out happy in the end with a nice bow on it. That sometimes it's messy, but it is, yes, it's that planting the seed. Thank you, Sarah. I know somebody put it to me once that there are a lot of drops in the bucket and we never know which drop we are, but we could be the one that really helps. And I don't know if any of you have been doing this long enough to have people come to you and say, you know, you worked with me a few years ago and you were so helpful, and you couldn't even remember that person. It's, you know, it's a joy. And when you do have those people that are there, and I know I said don't take it personally, but keep those as your reminders for those days that are not going so well. You know that there are people that are out there. I know someone that I worked with 24 years ago in a substance abuse program for women who were experiencing domestic violence. And she managed to stop using crack, go into recovery, go back to school, get her master's degree in addiction studies, and is now working at a clinic in Tennessee with 23 years clean and sober. And I only knew her that first 2 years, but she still refers to me as her counselor. So it's just, that's one of the things that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take responsibility for her recovery. I was just glad to be a part of it. All right, I know you all are busy, so I'm certain that you can use an extra 20 minutes that you weren't counting on today. So I'm going to let you go. Thanks for inviting me, Erica.
And thank you, Linda. And you
Thank you.
mentioned something, you talked about no being a complete sentence, which is interesting because in one of, I think it's April. So in April, we will be doing a presentation with Raft, and they will do 4 square breathing along with a whole presentation about no being a complete sentence and how to say no in a positive way. So I'm really excited for that, and I hope that you all will come back and join us. We will meet again on March 4th. That is also a complete sentence. I love that. I'm that person. So yeah, March 4th, same time, 2 p.m. to 3:30, we will be doing social journaling with Olay, and that is going to be a really great presentation. I'm excited about that. And Alexandra, if you have any closing thoughts on anything?
So after this training ends, you'll receive the training evaluation form sent to the email that you registered with. And once you have completed that, then you will be able to receive your certificate. So please be sure to fill out this form. And if you have any issues with it, you're more than welcome to email myself or Erica or anybody at NC Costa. We can help you and make sure that you can get what you need.
Okay.
Right.
So thank you for that. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.